Hi everybody, it is Philip here at Ashfield College. I want to talk to you about night before notes for business for 6th year. Okay, the first practical stuff is that the exam is on Thursday 15th of June, so we're into week 2, so make sure you keep your momentum going because there's always the danger that you've got week 1, people are all G'd up for the exam. Week 2, people slip a little bit, so business is on the Thursday the 15th. So make sure you have all that planning, etc. in place for stuff like blue and black pens and calculators and rulers and all the basic housekeeping stuff done. On the screen there you can see I've put in what's known as an exam plan. Now an exam plan is twofold. One, it looks good. Secondly, I'd say to you is it will keep you disciplined in the exam, because what it means is you've got at 9:30 you will do what's called the SAQs, which are the short answer questions. At 10 o'clock you'll move on to the applied business question or the case study. Then you're looking at 10:40 to go to your first long question. 11:05 your next long question. 11:30 your next long question. 11:55 your last question, which is generally the really important one because it's the one that people are weakest at, the fourth one out of the 8. And then at 12:20 it's time for the final sweep of the paper, so you go back and you can fill in blanks that you mightn't if something might have come to you, so fill in blanks, etc. there. In relation to question types, we can look at first of all at a question called evaluate, and the advice I give you there is if the question says evaluate, there are separate marks going for the evaluation, which means you must be able to show that evaluation separately. My advice would be to put it in block capitals, underline it, then skip a line and put the evaluation in. The evaluation is going to say in my opinion or judgment, and then I'd advise you to give 1 or 2 good benefits about that evaluation. So for example, last year we were asked to evaluate about franchising as a method of expansion. There was 1 mark available for the evaluation if you said, in my opinion, franchising is very useful because the product or service has been tried and tested. That would be an example of a 1 mark evaluation. A big danger though is people will ignore the word evaluation and therefore you're ignoring marks. There could be as high as 5 marks going for an evaluation. We also look at discuss, and I suppose the safest thing here is if the question says discuss, just don't use headings and be aware of the fact you're probably looking for a paragraph or several paragraphs in a discuss question, and that is the easiest way to look at it. So look upon discuss as a paragraph. Practically everything is name and explain besides. Reading an exam question, if you look at a question which says evaluate how the Sale of Goods and Supply of Services Act helps to protect the consumer, you can divide the question to 3. I've mentioned evaluate already. The main core body of the question is the Sale of Goods and Supply of Services Act, and what you can do there is you can break up your answer into headings. So you can write down merchantable quality and you can explain it, or goods of merchantable quality and you can explain it. And then once your theme is to protect the consumer, but the key thing there in the core is to name and explain and show the evaluation, because you could put down lots of bullet points and you might end up getting 10 marks out of 30 because you only get marks for the point. You get no development marks, and you could also lose marks if you have no evaluation in there. Considering we're dealing with online marking, the paper layout in the answer book is extremely important because the papers are scanned, which means the papers are going to be, you've got to keep your writing in between the ditches or the edges or margins of the paper, and also it would be very, very useful for you to make sure that everything is labelled extremely carefully. In particular, the question 1 part A or question 1 part B or part C. 1 part per page or pages. Leave gaps between your mini paragraphs. It makes it easier to correct. Get straight to the point. Your name and explaining most of the time. Practice writing neatly against the clock, and neatness and layout create an impression in the examiner's mind. So make sure you take care there with the presentation of it all. A couple of important topics. Management skills. So we're looking at leadership, motivation and communication, or leadership, communication, motivation, that order if you want to call them the LCMs. Last year we had no leadership, only a short question. With no motivation, only a short question. In relation to communication, I would advise you to be very specific and make sure that you know what you're doing there. It's an option this year. It'll be question 5, only attempted if you've absolutely prepared for it. Management activities, of those 3, organising and controlling were both up last year. I think planning wasn't up as a major question. I will be looking at the different types of plans, which we'll see in a while, has been important. So planning, organising, controlling. That's chapter 7. That comes up all the time. Again, it's an option. It's an option for question 5. Marketing mix appears every single year in the paper in some shape or form. It could be on the ABQ because it's Unit 5, and Unit 5, 6 and 7 is where the ABQ comes from. So we're looking at product, price, place, promotion. For the ABQ, the minimum is to know a decent definition of product, price, place and promotion. My advice would be know everything about product, price, place and promotion, because it'll overlap probably the ABQ and one or two long questions as well. Other handy one would be the stages of NPD. The stages of new product development is also a popular one. Just make sure you know your paragraph under each stage and make sure that every stage is in the correct order. And probably a tricky one there would be the reasons for prototype development was asked before. So the reasons, why would you prepare a prototype, and you can link all that to test marketing as well. Promotional mix is also, and just to say there, the NPD stages, they could equally be asked in the applied business question because they are, you know, a kind of topic is very ABQable there because they lend themselves to the ABQ. As indeed is the promotional mix, we look there at the advertising, public relations and sponsorship. Make sure that you call it public relations and sponsorship, not sponsorship on its own. Sales promotion, make sure you get the word gimmicks into your definition, and personal selling is just a definition of personal selling required there. So in the applied business question, you get marks for getting your headings correct, you get marks for getting the paragraph correct, and you get marks for getting the link correct, and the link is going to have to be in black or blue. Most likely topics in Unit 5, 6 and 7 is coming up next. Market research, types and purpose. Make sure you know primary and secondary and examples of each. Market segmentation, make sure you're able to use the word section and know the different types of segmentation. Marketing mix I've mentioned already, NPD I've mentioned already. Promotional mix I've mentioned already. Reasons for business expansion is a previous question. Debt and equity funding now might be a long shot for the ABQ. It was up in 2020 in the ABQ. Funding by debt, funding by equity as a means of funding the expansion. Also an outside bet could be challenges of setting up new business involving a business plan there as well. The new business, we're looking at raising finance, we're looking at recruitment, we're looking at types of production and ownership options. They're all challenges, but that could come up. And also be aware that finance can overlap between Unit 4 and Unit 5, which means you could get startup finance, short term, medium term, long term on the ABQ as well, despite the fact it looks like it's in Unit 4. Unit 6 is very specific. We're looking at the services of a community development agency. Lots of stuff overlaps here. I'd always prepare one on the LEOs, the local enterprise offices. And then we've got social and economic benefits of community development, which could come up in the ABQ. Again, it's been up before. Economic variables and the impact on business. Just make sure you know interest rates and inflation. They're probably the most likely ones here. Impact of business on the local and national economy is a very good question there from either 08, I think 08 called Fruit First Limited and ABQ. It's worth looking up on examination.ie because it talks about how the impact of a smoothie company has on both the local economy in the Midlands where it's based and also the national economy in terms of things like corporation tax and exports, etc. Social responsibility of business towards the stakeholders was up last year on the ABQ, but could go up this year as a question too. That often happens. And the types of business organisations, advantages and disadvantages there, you know, again, you'd probably say it's got a great chance of coming in the ABQ. Make sure you know your sole trader from your partner, from your companies, from your alliances, franchises, co-ops, and the whole list of stuff there. Make sure you know all those, the pros and cons of each. Unit 7, which is question 3 off the paper. Unit 6, by the way, is question 2. The EU decision-making process and the impact on the business. That's huge on the course. It gets asked very, very frequently. Maybe it's a bit tricky for an ABQ, but it would be a very likely question for question 3 or a short answer question. Changing nature of the international economy and its impact has been asked before. I think the last two there are the two that are most likely, I think, for the applied business question. We're looking at the opportunities and challenges of international trade and also the global marketing mix. And it's very important to say there with the global marketing mix. It's the marketing mix from Unit 5, but you have to have a global or international twist. So you can talk about modifying the product or price or place or promotion as per the rules of international trade. It could be a language thing, it could be a legal issue as well. The applied business question then, the method, and I suppose it's worthwhile noting here that in the method for the applied business question that we have to take on board the fact that a lot of the information that you will use will be given to you in the case study itself. So for example, last year we had evidence of teamwork, training, franchising and organic growth in the passage, and all 4 of those were key paragraphs. My advice would be, get your heading correct, underline your heading, skip a line, paragraph the heading, skip another line and put in your link. And your link has got to be blue or black pen as per the rules of the exam. Repeat the dose several times, part A, part B and part C, and that is your structure. And make sure you read that question carefully, especially if the word evaluate comes up. So read the questions before reading the passage so you know what you're at. Jot down the main headings in the back of your answer book. Read the passage at least twice. The links are usually very obvious. Name, explain and link. You can use the same link twice in separate sections, I should say, in A, B and C. Can't use it twice within a section. Last part then is on to long questions, and we look at the long questions, and we are dealing with the long questions as worth 60% of the paper. This year you're probably looking at question 1 and question 4 coming from the first 3 chapters. That's highly likely to happen. Question 1 for sure, question 4 probably. That's 2 of your questions. Question 3 is from Unit 7, and you want 1 more question from the far side, or you can take 2 from the far side. You must have 1 question from each section. From the first 4 questions, you must do 1. For the second 4 questions, you must do 1 as well. A popular choice would be 1, 4, 5 and 7. Generally 7 is from the marketing section, and it is popular. These questions are worth 60% of the paper. 1, 4, 5, 7 are common combinations. Watch for, discuss and evaluate as well. In relation to chapter 1 to 7 now, of kind of 1 to 7 should be worth 45% of the paper. Make sure of the 2 relationships. Remember to use mutual benefit for a cooperative relationship. Also remember to use a win-win situation. Competitive relationship then, where one party benefits at the expense of another, that can be called a win-lose. Watch for separate questions on interest groups as well. They could be short questions, they could be long questions. Be careful in Unit 1, question 4 of the Data Protection Act overlap. It can be asked in question 1 or question 4. Be careful of that. My advice is make sure you know your data subjects, your data controllers, your Data Protection Commissioner and your GDPR, and the whole legislation. Know it extremely well, because you know, you have peace of mind. Even if it doesn't come up in the paper, going in there not knowing it could cause you a bit of damage if you're choosing your questions. Chapter 2 is probably more straightforward. You've got the law of contract. Invitation to treat was last asked in 2008, all of 15 years ago. Make sure we know legislative versus non-legislative methods are the opposites to each other by way of definition. Merciful quality, make sure you mention price and durability. Guarantee, use the words additional benefit or additional protection. I would be fancying the Sale of Goods and the Way of Service Act to come up for no other reason than it has been up in a while, and they've asked consumer protection last year. I would think that CCPC could come up as a short question, either as the letters that you're asked to explain, or the actual previous question that came up a couple of years ago there, the CCPC and the evaluation of it. Chapter 3 is all about legislation to do with employment. Employment discrimination must include the words less favouring the answer. That could come as a short question this year. It was up last year. Primary and secondary picketing hasn't been asked for quite a while. Make sure you know words like negotiation, arbitration, conciliation. They're a former question. I'd be fancying the Unfair Dismissals Act in some shape or form this year. Maybe the question, which was up in 2012, the correct procedure for engaging with the employee under the Unfair Dismissals Act, and generally speaking we'll see it's all about improving performance, but you must follow all the steps, otherwise it would be an unfair dismissal. That one, the idea of counselling and verbal and written warnings, that will be a question that will be long overdue. I also think the Workplace Relations Commission, given how important it is in reality, also has got a good chance. Remember, these questions have got a good chance of coming up because there's 3 parts to question 1, there's 3 parts to question 4, they'll probably come from that section. Chapter 4 is on enterprise. Watch out for entrepreneurship with an I, which is an easy section. Students like it. The methods of encouraging it and the benefits of it for the business are the main features there. Do not confuse managerial words with enterprise words. This year, I suppose, it'll be a huge thing in 2024 Leaving Cert, because the first 7 chapters of the ABQ topics, you cannot use leadership or communication or motivation or planning or organising or controlling. If you do, you're in bother. Keep your list simple. Things like innovative, risk taker, independent, realistic, and also confident. So all of those there are extremely important, and flexible as well. On to chapter 5, which is know your leadership definition. Also know your leadership styles. We're looking at autocratic, democratic and laissez-faire. Be able to say what each one is and the result of each one in terms of what happens to employees of autocratic leaders, of democratic leaders and laissez-faire leaders as well. Know Maslow's hierarchy of human needs in exact order. They could come up. It's a nice question when you name it, you explain it and you give literally an example of applying Maslow's at each stage. McGregor's been less popular. Don't be surprised 1 year is going to arrive up there. Chapter 6 is a chapter on communication. Know the principles and know the barriers of effective communication. Know your reports, know your memo, know your letter. Also know an email too. That was up last year for the first time ever. The details, it was 4 or 5 marks going for the layout of an email involving the recipients and the sender and the topic and the opening and closing bit. Remember, Data Protection Act can be examined in Unit 1 as well, and that could trick people or trip people up there. If you're asked a question on technology, make sure you mention the technology types first. So for example, you're talking about email, don't bury it in a paragraph, put it up there as a heading. Finally, chapter 7, which is planning, organising and controlling. I'd be fancying planning for this year. Planning, make sure we know the strategic, tactical, contingency, operational and mission statement of the 5 accepted types of plans. Then we look at organising the key areas. I'll be looking here at the line structure and the matrix structure. The pros and cons of each one of those. Know words like span of control, chain of command, delegation. And then we look at the matrix structure as well, the pros and cons of it. And then the last page here and the last piece of the video, we're going to look at the 3 different types of controls. They were up last year. Maybe keep an eye on credit control, because credit control was not in the paper last year. You could be asked a question about how to minimize the bad debts in the business under credit control there, which is extremely important. And finally, best of luck with your exams, and thank you very much for listening.